Welcome to Convocation today. I'm grateful to see faces in person. Thank you for logging into the live stream as well. Registration is open right now, and I wanted to just remind you, Convocation is a one-credit class that you can take for repeatable credit. You can take it every semester if you'd like, so as you're registering for classes, if you're going to be here next year, consider Convocation as an extra class. Remember, there's a Convocation Plus option as well. That gives you a second credit and gives you a chance to go in a little bit more depth and to have lunch with some of the presenters and have some discussions. I wanted to introduce our speaker, but first give you a couple of announcements for those of you in the class. First of all, all students should fill out the Graham response assignment after the presentation, and if you're watching from the live feed, make sure you do the Graham attendance assignment so I know that you're there. I gave you 4 numbers last time, well, 3 and a word, but just remember this class has a very high required percentage. You need 100% to pass Convocation. But it's not too hard to get to 100%. You need to come to 10 presentations or watch them, 10 responses for 3 cultural events, and then meeting me. And if any of you have not met me, or if you have questions, I'd be happy to talk to you right after the presentation. If you do have less than 100% and you have questions about that, just let me know and I'll respond. And I do know I owe a couple of you emails, and I will catch up today. Remember, with the cultural events, there are some that are live and some that are online. There is going to be a really special cultural event here next Monday night at 7:30. It'll be in this room. Los Hermanos de los Andes, a musical group, will be here performing, and that will count for a music culture event. So I'll send more information about that one, but keep that on your radar if you need a music event. One other thing I want to say, just by way of introduction, our presenter is Jodi Graham, and she is the executive director for Utah Humanities, which is a statewide nonprofit that helps partners with communities across the state to value, to celebrate their stories, their history, their culture, and their art. I was just thinking through my 3 years doing Convocation. I went through and counted up. I've done 72 weeks of Convocation, or will have by the end of the semester. Of those, 11 of them we can trace right back to the work that Utah Humanities does. That's 15% of our Convocation presentations in my time. May not have happened if it hadn't been for Utah Humanities. So they work behind the scenes a lot. I wanted to just acknowledge what a great impact they have on our community here in class, but on communities across the state. So our presenter, as I said, her name is Jodi Graham. She first came to Utah Humanities in 1996 and was appointed as executive director in March 2018. She served the organization in a variety of capacities, including bringing scholars and community members together to discuss difficult issues through a humanities lens, a program currently called Community Convocations. She's also managed UH's grants and outreach programs. She's a certified change leader and served on a variety of nonprofit and educational boards in Utah. She's also on the leadership team of the Village Square Utah, which she describes as a nervy bunch of conservatives and liberals who believe that disagreement and dialogue make for good conversation, a good country, and a good time. Jodi received her BS in musical theater from Weber State University, and she still sings with her family whenever she has a chance. So if you'll join with me in welcoming Jodi Graham to the stage.
Hi, everybody. It is such an honor to be here with you today, and I love being on a stage. It's been a little while since I've been able to be on a stage in a former life. I would have brought my tap shoes and some sequins, but I will spare all of you that experience today, since you are getting credit for this class, which, by the way, I've never had a homework assignment named after me before, which I think is really cool. So make sure you get that done. Get that done and turned in. I'd like to thank Dr. Allred for the opportunity to be here today to talk with you and to tell you all about the humanities. I'm really excited to be here in person. It feels like it's been a really long time since I've been in a room with other human beings, and it feels like we've come a really long way since where we were a year ago. Snow College actually has a really special place in my own heart. I have family members who have attended Snow. My sister met her husband here. My sister-in-law was one of the student ambassadors, and my daughter came here year after year for her favorite volleyball camp, so go Badgers. You've picked a really great place to come and continue your education. So like Dr. Allred said, my name is Jodi Graham, and I'm the Executive Director of Utah Humanities. Utah Humanities is a nonprofit that provides free humanities programming all over the state to help communities understand each other better and to bring them together, something that we need now more than we ever have before. You could say that we are in the business of learning, or that we are in the business of curiosity, or that we are in the business of ideas. And when Dr. Allred was the chair of the Utah Humanities Board of Directors, this was a few years ago, he said that the humanities had given him a new motto, and that motto was rethink. This one word served as a reminder for him to think again, think in a new way, and think more deeply. Now, 2020 gave us a lot of things, including giving us the opportunity to rethink the things that are most important to us, to rethink the kind of society that we want to live in, and to rethink how we want to help shape that society. So at Utah Humanities, I guess you could really say that we are in the business of rethinking. Now, some of the worst things in life happen unexpectedly, and there is no better example of that than 2020. The whole year, really, from pandemics, earthquakes, hurricane-force windstorms, and social uprising, it seemed that every day brought something new and unexpected. But it's not just the bad things that are unexpected. Some of the most wonderful things in life are also unexpected. The best stories begin with, and all of a sudden. And some of the best adventures never turned out as planned. When something unexpected happens, it always gives you an opportunity to rethink. My own life has been filled with the unexpected and with rethinking. A long time ago, in a land far, far away, I graduated from Weber State University in Ogden. And after I graduated, I did what everybody does. I took my first professional job in something that maybe wasn't part of my field of study. I became a secretary in a small real estate office where I learned a lot of really cool practical skills, such as using a fax machine. I don't know if any of you even remember what a fax machine is. Transferring phone calls and ordering bagels for sales meetings. I felt like I was doing a pretty good job of adulting. I was earning some money, I was happy, everything was going about as I expected when all of a sudden, my husband came home one day and told me about a job he'd seen in Salt Lake at a place called the Utah Humanities Council. Now, since I graduated with a degree in theater, humanities sounded like a great fit. I didn't know anything about Utah Humanities Council, but I thought I'd give it a shot. So I went down, I interviewed, and they hired me. And so now I was working in a job that I loved and was actually using my degree. I had found my professional home. I learned even more practical skills like coordinating meetings, reviewing grant applications, scheduling speakers, lectures, and ordering toilet paper. There was always something to learn, and I loved it. Somehow 8 years went by. Everything was going about as I had expected, when all of a sudden, my husband came home one day and told me about another job opportunity, this time for him. An American university in Vienna, Austria was looking for someone who had years of fundraising experience, who was also fluent in German, to create fundraising and alumni programs for their 4 European campuses. This person would naturally have to relocate to Austria. Now, it just so happened that my husband was a fundraising professional with years of experience. He had a degree in German, and he had lived in Austria for 2 years before. Now, I didn't speak a word of German. We had 2 small children. I had a career that I loved, but I didn't hesitate for a second. and all of a sudden, we moved to Vienna. Now, moving to Austria was not something that I had ever expected. It was amazing and challenging all at the same time, and it gave me multiple opportunities to rethink. It forced me to rethink everything about myself. I went from being a highly educated, articulate, professional woman who knew who I was in the world to being illiterate, unemployed, and a foreigner who was always lost. Now, it's fair to say I'm still always lost, but it's a lot harder when you're lost in the signs or in a foreign language. It's a lot harder to find where you're trying to go. And as a person who has communicated easily all of my life, the inability to grasp the German language was particularly difficult for me. I couldn't read labels at the grocery store. I couldn't talk to people. I couldn't even order a cheeseburger at the Austrian McDonald's for my kids with the instructions that it needed to be ketchup only. It was really frustrating, and at times I felt completely isolated. But the humanities helped me survive. As a theater major, I knew how to watch for meaning and expression with body language and facial language. I relied on reading the emotion of people and their intent, matching it with an occasional German word that I knew, and trying to figure out what they were trying to say. I did a lot of smiling. I did a lot of nodding. I did a lot of laughing, probably in places that were not entirely appropriate, and I did a lot of talking with my hands. Now, some of the first phrases I learned in German were for trying to get my kids to behave in public. Now, we weren't used to living in a big city, and we definitely weren't used to riding subways, streetcars, and buses wherever we needed to go. We didn't have a car the whole first year that we lived in Vienna, so walking and public transportation were the only ways that we could get around. Now, my American kids were used to traveling around everywhere by car, so if they were loud or ornery or throwing a fit, I was the only one who was bothered by it. But when we were on a subway car in Vienna, the whole car was bothered by it. I have a very clear memory of being on a subway car with my children, sitting next to a beautiful woman wearing a lovely, probably quite expensive white coat. And when she got up and left at her stop, she had little dirty footprints all over the coat, because my kids had no concept of personal space. So some of the first German phrases that I learned were "Hör auf" and "Lass sie in Ruhe," which means stop it and leave her alone. Next were the recorded phrases that you hear when you get off the subway. Endstation, which means end station, and bitte alle aussteigen, which means everybody off. Now, I'll have to say, if anybody in here does speak German, yes, my American accent is really, really bad. It always was bad. It continues to be bad, so I'll apologize for that. In fact, it was so bad that when we were living in Austria and I was trying to speak to someone, I would always try to initiate a conversation in German, and they would quickly ask me if I wanted to speak in English because they knew they weren't going to understand anything that I could say. Now, as I said, my children were pretty young when we moved overseas. They were only 2 and 3 years old. And after a few weeks, we decided to go ahead and put them in an Austrian preschool. Well, they call it kindergarten. Now, our kids didn't speak any German, so we thought it would be an easy way for them to learn the language and also give them some other friends to play with. So we enrolled them, we dropped them off one morning, and just waited to see what happened. I was so worried and I was so nervous, I couldn't wait to go pick them up at the end of the day to find out how it went. And of course, they were just fine. They totally figured it out. And in fact, it was fascinating to watch how they each dealt with their own communication barriers. My son became a physical comedian. He would hit himself in the head, fall down, roll around, do anything that he could to get a laugh from other kids around him. My daughter, on the other hand, really stuck close to the teachers. She would hug them, she would kiss them, she'd put her little chubby hands on their faces and smile at them with her big blue eyes. And it wasn't long before the kids were understanding and speaking more German than I was, which was great for them, but didn't make me feel any better about my situation. Now, this whole experience made me think my assumptions about people who had come to America without knowing how to speak English. Without realizing it, I'd made unjustified assumptions about their motivation for being here, their intelligence, their work ethic. I mean, why would they come here without even knowing how to speak the language? Why didn't they just learn the language already? It can't be that hard. And seriously, why did they send their kids to school when the kids didn't speak English? Did they just expect the teachers to do all the work? Basically, all of the things that I had done when living in a foreign country myself. So I have a new respect for communication and for those who can speak more than one language, no matter how thick their accent is. Now, I did eventually learn enough German that I could communicate and have basic conversations. I found work as an English tutor, and I actually took a job at the International Atomic Energy Agency on the UN campus, which was great because then I could buy American peanut butter and root beer, and everybody spoke English. We took some time to travel the country to see the beauty and the wonders of this place we were living, the castles, the cathedrals, the music. Everything was amazing, and even though it was old, it was all very new to us. We visited Salzburg, where they filmed The Sound of Music, and we visited my favorite place in the world called Hallstatt. It's a fairy tale city on a lake with mountains you can't even imagine, with some of the oldest salt mines in the world. It was magical. We were having fun. We were getting used to this new life when all of a sudden, we found ourselves at the end of our 2-year contract, and it was time to head back to the States. Now, the place that we landed coming back to America was completely unexpected. Now, we went from Vienna, Austria, to a small town in rural Wyoming called Riverton. Now, Riverton is in the middle of Wyoming near the Wind River mountain range, and it's about 2 hours from anywhere most people would want to go on purpose. You just couldn't imagine a place that was more different from where we had been living for the past 2 years, and we loved it. So while we were enjoying the culture and bustle of a major European city, we were missing the wide open spaces of the American West. We missed fishing and camping and hiking. We missed American football and the 4th of July. Now, living in Wyoming had its own unique challenges. We found ourselves in winters where the outside temperature hit 30 degrees below zero at noon, and where the wind literally took your breath away, and where the kids only stayed in from recess if the temperature hit zero, not 32, 0. If it was anything above 0, the kids went outside. I learned that you can tell how cold it is by whether or not your nose hairs freeze. I learned that you shouldn't take your car through the car wash when it's below 0, no matter how brightly the sun is shining. Wyoming presented me with more opportunities to rethink. We lived in Riverton for 6 years and took many trips back to Utah to visit family. It's a 5-hour drive in good weather, and there is one stretch that you go through called South Pass. It's beautiful and it's brutal, and in the wintertime, really in wintertime is any time between October and July, it can be really sketchy. You could start out on your road trip in sunny weather and end up in a blizzard in South Pass where the snow is coming down sideways, and you have to open your car door just to make sure that you're still actually on the road. And that's only if the road was still open, because they did like to just shut the roads too. You could watch the temperature gauge on your car go from 40 degrees above 0 down to 30 below in a matter of minutes. The windows freeze on the outside and on the inside of your car. Your car becomes a rolling ice ball. And it was on one of these drives that I found myself rethinking. I rethought the journey of the Mormon pioneers and the Martin and Willie Handcart companies. Now, growing up in Utah, I'd heard pioneer stories all my life, and to be honest, they never really connected with me. I didn't have a strong connection, probably because I think I would have been one of those people when it came time to go west. I'd say, I think I'm good. Y'all go and have a good time. Send me a postcard when you get there. But for some reason, driving along that same path with the same destination brought the history alive for me. I wanted to learn more about the people who braved the harsh Wyoming weather and took that treacherous journey on foot. So I dug into the history a little bit. Now, the Willie and Martin Handcart companies left the Nebraska Territory in August of 1856. There were about 1,000 people, and they were mostly made up of British and Scandinavian converts to the church and their families. All they wanted was to make it to the new Mormon homeland in Utah. They pulled hand carts on the trek because it was cheaper and because it was faster than taking carts pulled by oxen. Now, the hand carts weren't big. They were about 3 feet wide and 5 feet long and held skimpy supplies of food, plus only 17 pounds of personal belongings. Things like clothes, blankets, and just the little things that they wanted to bring with them to their new life. Food was rationed. Each person got 1 pound of flour every day, plus anything they killed along the way. 3 smaller handcart companies had already crossed the plains to Utah quickly and easily that year. Well, maybe not easily, successfully that year. But the Willie and Martin companies didn't plan for the unpredictable Wyoming weather. They knew they were starting out late in the season, but when they set out, the weather was nice and warm. The 2 groups were traveling about 2 weeks apart, and as the Martin company reached Wyoming, food supplies were already running low. Now, the captain wanted the company to move faster, so he ordered that personal belongings be reduced from 17 pounds to 10 pounds a person. So the pioneers left their heavy clothes and blankets. They even were told that they had to be burned so that no one could sneak back and try to get them back in their handcarts. In October, a fierce Wyoming winter storm struck as the Martin Company was crossing the North Platte River. Now, the river was shallow, but the river was wide, and it was freezing cold. The Willie Company was camped near the Sweetwater River in South Pass, too cold and too hungry to keep going any further. On October 19th, a rescue party sent from Salt Lake found the Willie group. Half the rescuers stayed there, and the other half pushed on to the Martin Company, finding them 9 days after their freezing river crossing. The Martin Company was exhausted. They were nearly out of food in the bitter cold. In that 9 days since the river crossing, 56 members of their party had died. And more than 200 pioneers died on that 4-month journey from Nebraska to Utah. Now, after learning more about what these immigrants experienced, every drive over South Pass became a time that I thought about the people who walked that same path to Utah and the people who died of cold and exhaustion just trying to get to a better life. If I had been on that journey, how would I have physically survived? And what would I have done to mentally survive? Emily Hill was a 16-year-old pioneer in the Martin Company who used poetry and music to endure the journey. And she wrote this poem called Hunger and Cold. Not a morsel to eat could we anywhere see. Cold, weary, and hungry and helpless were we. On the brink of the tomb, few succumbed to despair. Our trust was in God, and our strength was in prayer. Oh, whence came those shouts in the still starry night that thrilled us and filled us with hope and delight? God bless them for heroes, the tender and bold, who rescued our remnant from hunger and cold. Hunger and cold is something we've all experienced, usually as a temporary inconvenience that we can quickly rectify. How did they survive hunger and cold for 4 months? It really made me rethink. Even in the harshest of conditions, the humanities helped them maintain hope that helped them survive until relief arrived. Now, living in Riverton also gave me the opportunity to learn more about Native American culture. Riverton sits within the Wind River Reservation, the 7th largest reservation by size and the 5th largest reservation by population in the United States. It's home to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes, who called that land home long before the state's boundaries were drawn, over 12,000 years. To put that a little bit in perspective, Austria was established in AD 996, which is just over 1,000 years ago. Now, we loved summers in Wyoming, and not just because we weren't freezing, but because powwows happened in the summertime. Now, I'd heard of powwows before, but living in Wyoming, I was able to learn and understand more about the traditions and ceremonies that had been passed down for generations. They are amazing events that you experience with all of your senses. Powwows are filled with color, music, and food, and we were immersed in the singing, drums, and dancing. We ate fry bread and lamb stew. And when the elders would bring in eagle feathers and flags, when the dancers gathered and the drums started, it literally took my breath away. Being able to see these ceremonies and hear some of the traditional stories gave me a greater appreciation for the Native American culture that surrounded us. I began to rethink my own connection to the land and to all of its inhabitants, both 2- and 4-legged, winged, and waterbound. And I was humbled by the Native American traditions that honor their ancestors and the belief that all things are connected in spirit. So we spent 6 wonderful years living in Wyoming. My husband was working for Central Wyoming College, and I had taken a job at the elementary school where my kids were attending. We were busy with all the things you would expect. We had sports, we had music lessons, and we were loving it. when all of a sudden, Wyoming's boom and bust economy busted, and we found ourselves on our way back to Utah. And in a completely unexpected and wonderful turn of events, I found myself back at Utah Humanities. I had come full circle, and I was literally back home. But now I was armed with the things I learned during the 8 years that I was away. I was definitely older, but I was seeing things through a completely different set of eyes. I had unexpected experiences that changed my life and my perspective. I continued working at Utah Humanities, running programs, serving as the assistant director, traveling all over the state to meet with people, and I was immersed in the work that I loved. When the executive director retired in 2018, I was somehow lucky enough to be selected as the executive director, and I was on to a whole new adventure. My family was happy. I was having a great time, passionate about my work and my life, when all of a sudden, it was March 15th, 2020. Oh, 2020. What a great year you were. Now, I don't know what you were doing a year ago or how you thought this whole thing was going to play out, but I remember taking a trip to Washington, D.C. the first week of March 2020. This is when the very first whispers of the pandemic were starting to bubble up and actually starting to stick. We were in Washington to meet with Utah's congressional delegation to talk to them about the importance of the humanities and why they should give more funding to the National Endowment for the Humanities. And in the meetings that we had before the meetings and the orientations, we were told specifically, don't hug anybody and don't shake anybody's hand, which was really weird because we'd walk into a room and the first thing you want to do is hold out your hand and say, hi, it's nice to meet you. So we did that weird elbow bump thing that you do. And we would go, it's so nice to meet you. Sorry for hitting the microphone. It's so nice to meet you. Doing it just like this. We started noticing every cough, every sniffle, and every sneeze. We became aware of every handrail and every doorknob we touched, and we washed our hands every time we passed a bathroom. We got home without getting sick, didn't worry too much about it, until Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell were diagnosed. And somehow with those two jazz players, the virus became real, and the world shut down shortly after. But the year had started out so great, with all the jokes about the year 2020 and how it would give us all hindsight, and 2020 is perfect vision. We were 3 months into our New Year's resolutions. We'd watched Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. We saw Jumanji: The Next Level. We saw Ford versus Ferrari in a movie theater with people and popcorn. It was a wonderful time. We were all just going about our business when all of a sudden, the most unexpected events happened one after the other, like cosmic dominoes all in a line with fate sneezing to knock the first one over. And we experienced it all. The great toilet paper shortage. No sports, no school, no church. Working from home, learning from home, worshiping from home, being stuck at home. The earthquake, murder hornets, the Tiger King, racial unrest, protests and riots, politics that challenged friendships and divided families. The world was swirling, and I felt like so much was out of my control, and once again, the humanities helped me survive. One of my board members last year shared a poem with me that made me stop in my tracks and made me rethink, and it's called Pandemic by Lynn Unger. What if you thought of it as the Jews considered the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel. Cease from buying and selling. Give up just for now on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray. Touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that has come clear. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live. Now, the words in this poem encouraged me to rethink my own reaction to the pandemic. I had been mourning all of the things that had been taken away. My daughter graduated from high school in 2020 without all of the things that she had been so excited for and looking forward to. No senior prom, no senior all-night party, no commencement, no senior trip. Her yearbook from her senior year in high school doesn't have a single signature. We had a big party planned in St. George for my grandmother's 100th birthday in May. These were the things that felt so important, and they kind of festered as I felt the world was incredibly unfair as all of these things were taken away one by one. But this poem offered a new way to think about it. It offered a new perspective and helped me shift my focus and adapt my thinking. Give up just for now on trying to make the world different than it is. Reading this gave me permission to stop trying to change the situation I was in, but instead to rethink and see the situation for what it was. It helped me see that there were things that I could control, so those were the things that I was going to worry about. Reach out your heart, reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. These words reminded me that there were ways to stay connected even if we couldn't physically be together, and that I needed to be rooted in kindness. Now, last week, a colleague of mine in Colorado sent me this poem by Bobby Lefevre called Nothing Left. And when there is nothing left to do but live, let us retire the noise and build a home inside its stillness. Grab a wrench and unfasten the parts of you that have become mechanical. Rest your weary limbs in the bed of anomaly. Outside, the machine is powering down. You can hear the birds when the gears aren't grinding. When there is nothing left to do but live, make a vacation of your body. Each part explored, a stamp on your passport. Begin with your heart, maybe. Crawl inside and sightsee. Ask difficult questions about who it is and why. Outside, the machine is powering down. You can hear yourself when the gears aren't grinding. When there is nothing left to do but live, simply show up. That has always been enough. And together in this sudden strangeness, radical imagination will run wild. Tomorrow being built today. Now, this poem was written about the same time as the pandemic poem, but two of the lines stand out to me, particularly this time of year when the world is starting to wake up, both from the long winter that we've just had and also waking up from this pandemic. You can hear the birds when the gears aren't grinding, and you can hear yourself when the gears aren't grinding. These are words that remind me that as the machine of the world starts to run again, I don't have to go completely back to the way things were. I can take what I've learned over this past year, this year of quiet, where I was able to hear the birds and hear myself, and be a little more thoughtful. Slow down a little, listen a little more, appreciate a lot more. Poetry has a way of reaching into my heart and articulating my emotions when I can't find the right words myself. Poetry can give us solace, especially at times of pain and uncertainty. Poets lead us to times and places where we may be hesitant to go, when the world seems turned upside down and nothing makes sense. Poetry can be an anchor, an island in an angry sea, a support to grasp and steady our feet. A good poem can remind us of our own frailty and of our own humanity. Poet and author Mia Leonin said it this way: in this time of emotional quarantine, many of us are struggling with feeling distracted. Poetry offers an antidote. Anxiety is often caused by pushing away emotions. It's a byproduct and emotional static when we aren't turning to our real emotions. Right now, just getting through the day and obtaining some sense of normalcy can be very anxiety-producing, but a poem, even if it's not about hope, that pause and depth of feeling a poem brings anchors me. In times of crisis, that's what I go to poetry for. Poetry is written from one human being to another, a conversation. People often come to poems at times of heartbreak, and this is a time of collective heartbreak. So what better time for poetry? Now, the COVID-19 pandemic was unexpected, but it wasn't unprecedented. History helps us shed light on our current situation by examining events of the past. In 1918, the world was ravaged by Spanish influenza. Now, the advice given 103 years ago to help stop the spread sounds eerily familiar. Worldwide, people were advised to stay home, practice social isolation, and seek medical treatment if sick. The health commissioner in St. Louis closed schools and canceled public gatherings for about 10 weeks. Businesses' hours were restricted, which was not a popular decision. And the commissioner went so far as to have policemen in the department stores to help keep people moving along. He shut down churches, public dances, Halloween parties, and football games. People were advised to avoid shaking hands and to stay indoors. The library put a halt on lending books, and regulations were passed banning spitting. But according to the New York Times, Boy Scouts in New York City approached people they'd seen spitting on the street and gave them cards that read, "You are in violation of the sanitary code." Now, in San Francisco, the mayor, business owners, and medical leaders signed a full-page ad in the newspaper that read in all caps, "Wear a mask and save your life." And in some communities, a white scarf or towel was placed on the front door to let everyone know that someone inside the house was infected and they needed to stay away. Now, the Spanish influenza claimed more than 650,000 lives in the United States and infected more than a third of the world's population. It killed more than 50 million people worldwide. More Americans were lost to the Spanish influenza than died in World War I. Part of the impact of the 1918 pandemic was indeed the timing. The pandemic started in January 1918, overlapping with the war for 9 months and continuing after the war came to an end, and soldiers traveled back to their homes, sometimes bringing the virus with them. The 1918 influenza virus didn't originate in Spain, but the news coverage of it did. Influenza cases were widely reported in Spain because, as a neutral country in World War I, Spain didn't censor their press. On the other hand, countries involved in the war, such as Germany, Britain, and France, most likely limited the news of this deadly pandemic so it wouldn't lower the morale of the troops and raise questions about their military readiness. The medical community generally agrees that the 1918 influenza virus actually started in the United States in a military camp in Kansas. And from there, it's thought to spread throughout the United States and transported by American troop ships to the battlefields of France, where it gradually spread through Europe and the rest of the world. There were several people who survived the Spanish influenza, whose names you might recognize: Franklin D. Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and even Walt Disney. Think of how the world as we know it would have been altered if these men had died in the 1918 pandemic. Then rethink, what contributions will you go on to make in the world after surviving the 2020 coronavirus pandemic? Someday in the future, historians will look at 2020 and try to figure out exactly what happened and how it changed the course of history. Historians have spent centuries exploring who we are as humans based on the events and evidence of the past. When they get to 2020, what will the historians see? What will you remember? What are the things that angered and frustrated you? What are the things that brought you joy? What did you long for, and what did you discover that you could live without? What did you do to pass the time, and where did you go? Where didn't you go? Where did your mind turn for nourishment? Books? Nature? Poetry? And what on earth does all of this have to do with the humanities? Well, everything. The humanities are what connect us. The humanities are all the things that make us human. Now look at the very word humanities. Human and ties. Everything that makes us human ties us together. Humans are messy. We're predictable, we're unpredictable. We're mean and we're kind and we're jealous and we're protective and we're happy and we're sad and we're troubled and we're carefree. We are prophecy and paradox. And the humanities are the owner's manual for what makes us tick. The humanities are the many ways we tell the human story and the way we make sense of our world, the expected and the unexpected. The humanities help you see life through different lenses. And the experiences I've shared with you today are all part of my humanities story. In Austria, my lens was language and the fundamental human need to understand and communicate. In Wyoming, the lens was history and the respect that came from understanding cultural traditions. 2020 had several lenses. One was poetry and the greater understanding that I find when reading the words of others because I can't find the right words myself. Understanding that humankind has survived pandemics before, and we will indeed survive this one. Understanding, nothing is more human than the need to understand and be understood. And the humanities are the key that unlocks the door of understanding. The humanities do this in a number of ways. They clarify our roles as citizens in a democratic society. They help us understand and explain what to do or to whom we give authority. They let us think big and understand much. They make us curious about people and places. And they give us means to recognize the common ground shared by all varieties of human thought and endeavor, and to bring about connections among them. There is no other field or area of study that can do all of these things. There is no other field or area of study that can better prepare you for your own unexpected adventures. And I'd like to leave you with one last poem. We skipped a couple things, that's okay, called On the Other Side. So on the other side, through the looking glass, down the rabbit hole, into the wardrobe and out, into the enchanted forest where animals talk and danger lurks, and nothing works quite the way it did before, you have fallen into a new story. It is possible that you are much bigger or smaller than you thought. It is possible to drown in the ocean of your own tears. It is possible that mysterious friends have armed you with magical weapons you don't yet understand, but which you will need to save your own life and the world. Everything here is foreign. Nothing quite makes sense. That's how it works. Don't confuse the beginning of the story with the end. So when life hits you with the unexpected, follow the advice of Dr. Allred and turn to the humanities to help you rethink. Languages, literature, history, philosophy, ethics, anthropology, law, religion, the arts. Learn all you can. Ask questions and question the answers. Stay curious, and you'll be ready for your own, and all of a sudden. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions. We'll see if we have any. If there are any of you watching the live stream, type those into the chat. Do we have any questions from the audience in person? While people are thinking, let me ask a question.
Great.
The work that Utah Humanities does, there's probably something that Utah Humanities has done in the communities of every Utahn in the class. Could you tell us about one or two of your favorite partnerships in terms of humanities in Utah?
Absolutely. One of the coolest programs that we do is we work with small museums all throughout the state. And what we do is we bring in traveling exhibits from the Smithsonian Institution back in Washington, D.C. So these big exhibits come into these small, oftentimes rural museums, and the museums get a lot of training and a lot of capacity building on how to handle an exhibit like that. And then the local community also puts together their own exhibit that puts their spin on the national story of whatever it is. Right now, we're currently touring one called Waterways. It's all about the importance of water, and you know that living in the West, water is a really big issue. So what does that look like? What does water mean? How does it play into our traditions, into our culture, into our history, into the founding of this state? What are water rights? How much water does it take to make a gallon of fry sauce? I mean, these are all kind of the things that come up in these exhibits. And we take them all around the state, and we do different exhibit about every 3 years. The next one that we'll have coming in a couple of years is all about connecting rural communities, and we're excited for that one too. We've partnered here with Snow College in the past. One of our Waterways stops was actually at the Snow College campus in Richfield, so that was a good Snow connection. And we've done things at the Granary as well with a previous exhibit called Journey Stories. So that's one of my favorites. The other one, which Dr. Allred mentioned briefly in my bio, is community conversations. And what we do is we like to take something that's a little hard to talk about, and we try to put it through a humanities lens. So we'll either look at an image, a piece of art, a photograph, a short video, a piece of poetry, and look at the issue that way, and then have conversations with people who don't necessarily agree, and to see where they can find common ground. So much of what community conversations is not about persuading someone to your point of view, but to get a better understanding of people who think differently than you. And you can take that information, you can chew on it, you can see if you like how it tastes. If you don't like it, you're fine with what you did, but it may change your mind, and you may see something in a completely different perspective. So those are just a couple.
Thank you. Any other questions? Do we have any online?
No, there's none online.
Okay. So I have another one.
Okay.
How has the pandemic affected, like from your perspective in working with communities across the state and organizations, museums, how has the pandemic affected Utahns from your vantage point?
Right, so it's been incredibly difficult in some ways, but it's also been very cool in some ways. So naturally, most of our programming in the past has been in person. Part of the magic of the humanities is that in-person, face-to-face exchange of ideas. We couldn't do that in 2020, so we had to move everything into a virtual format. We were lucky enough that we had really strong relationships and strong partnerships with groups all over the state, that we had a level of trust that we could move it to an online format and it was still effective. It actually removed some barriers. Our book festival in the fall, we do a month-long book festival with programming usually all over the state. This year we put it all online, and we had so many more people tune in because they no longer had to travel, they didn't have to find a hotel room, they could just log in from their pajamas on their couch, they could tune in from anywhere. We had people even internationally. We had Mexico, Australia, and Argentina all tuned into our book festival event. So in some ways it provided more access, which was interesting. And we'll take some of that with us as we go forward into the future. But yeah, it was definitely a challenge.
We have time for one more question, if anyone has one. We have one online.
Yeah, so the one online is there any projects that you are currently planning for the near future?
We always have projects planning. One exciting thing that we're going to be working on is the anniversary of the 250th anniversary of America. So that'll be coming up in the next couple of years. We're always looking for ways to celebrate historical moments. We just recently participated in Thrive 125, which was the anniversary of Utah's 125th anniversary of statehood. And we'll have a lot of stuff coming up in a couple of years for our 50th anniversary that'll be really exciting to do as well. So basically, if there's anything involving history, books, ethics, we're probably involved in it some way, somehow.
Well, thank you very much. Let's give her another round of applause. And we'll be back next week.